Hello and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. This week's guest is an accomplished rock climber and has a whole series of firsts to his name. Jesse Dufton is perhaps best known as the first blind person to lead a climb of the Old Man of Hoy, a 449-foot daunting sea stack in the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. It earned him a Guinness World Record. Jesse's climb is the focus of Alastair Lee's multi-award-winning documentary Climbing Blind, and the sequel has just been released. He was the first blind person to put up a first ascent in Morocco, achieve first ascents in Greenland in winter. The list goes on. Jesse pushes his limits and refuses to give in to a genetic condition which completely robbed him of his sight in his mid-20s. His story has left people all over the world inspired and in awe of his attitude and what he's achieved so far. Jesse, it's great to have you on the podcast. You're just back from a climbing trip to Kalymnos in Greece. How did that go?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, Kalymnos is great. First time being there. Plenty of climbers rave about it, and I can see why.
What was the appeal of going there?
It's wet and rainy in the UK over Christmas. So, yeah, much better to go to Kalymnos over Christmas than it is to be in the UK, in my opinion.
And is it gentle climbing or is it quite hardcore stuff like you normally do?
It's what we call sport climbing. So that means that there are metal bolts drilled into the rock at intervals, so you can kind of attach yourself to those. So that kind of takes the danger element away, so you can just focus on like the difficulty of the moves. So is it gentle? I wouldn't say that sport climbing is gentle, but it's definitely more chilled out than like some other forms of climbing. Yeah.
And other forms of climbing, is it trad climbing that you do? Just explain to us what that is.
Yeah, that's right. So trad is short for traditional climbing, in that there's no like metal bolts in the rock. It's just a rock face, and you start with your climbing partner at the bottom, and obviously you've got to climb to the top. And the leader is the person that climbs first. And because there's no metal bolts in the rock, you have a whole selection of different size kind of metal wedges and these sprung-loaded things that you can insert into naturally occurring cracks in the rock, and that's what provides the safety. But obviously there's more risk involved in trad climbing than there is in sport climbing.
And leading, is that how climbers are judged?
I would say so, yeah, without going into ethics too much. Yeah, if you're a climber, basically the routes that you've led are what you get judged on. I know it sounds weird, like if you climb something on a top rope, almost it doesn't count.
It's a tough sport, actually. Tell me how you got into it in the first place.
So my usual line is that I didn't get a choice. So I did my first route when I was 2 years old. And
when you were 2? Oh, my goodness.
And I do not remember. So my dad took me climbing basically as soon as I could walk. And I climbed with him all throughout the UK, and in Fontainebleau is like a bouldering mecca. And I think when I first went to Font, I was small. I had to have a bath in a washing up bowl. So, and then I think I led my first route when I was like 11. Just been doing it ever since.
And did you fall in love with it? Did it just seem to be something you would always do because you'd done it literally from when you could walk?
Yeah, I think so. But then I guess the big choice came when I left home to go to university. And at uni, I got heavily involved in the mountaineering club and, met a load of friends and started going on adventures with my mates. And it all went from there, really.
Tell us about your sight. When you were a little boy and you were doing the climbing with your dad, did you have sight difficulties then when you were a little boy?
Yeah, so my sight was always terrible from the off. But it's hard for me to know like how bad it was because I've never seen normally, so I don't know what baseline normal is. So to put some kind of context to it, I could see the tree, but it was just a big green blob to me. I could never see the individual leaves, for example. It's only when I've talked to, sighted people and I'm like, oh, wow, they can see that. Oh, wow, I could never see that. I've never been able to see the stars. In terms of climbing, when I was placing the gear, I could kind of see it when it was right in front of my face, but the thought of being able to see something more than like 3 meters away, well, that just never occurred to me.
And will you explain your blindness to us and what's caused it?
Yeah, sure. So I have a genetic condition. So we've basically worked out that there's one letter in my genetic code where it's been swapped. So it should be X and it is Y, and that's one letter in, a billion code, a sequence of millions of them. And the effect of that is that some of the structural proteins that hold the light sensitive cells at the back of your eye together are defective. So over time, basically the light sensing part of the back of my eye has crumbled away into little breadcrumbs. And obviously when you lose those light sensing cells at the back of your eye, you stop being able to see.
And you've talked to scientists, you did in the documentary, about possible hopes for a cure. Is there a hope for a cure, Jesse, or that your sight can be improved as science and medicine move on?
I hope so. Something I picked up from my dad is an eternal optimism. So I'm always very hopeful that in some point in the future we'll be able to do something about it. And we have made big progress towards that, but there are still lots of things that we do not understand. So we can currently take one of my skin cells, turn it back into a stem cell, give it instructions to turn into a retina cell. But what we can't do is we can't give instructions for the cells to differentiate into the many different types of retina cell you'd need, and for them to self-assemble into the complicated three-dimensional shape that will be required to give sight to my eyes.
Gosh, that sounds extraordinary in itself. And let's hope as the next few years go on, I mean, science moves so quickly, doesn't it? That let's hope that there is something that can be done. But what's amazing is that you really have been determined in life, but also with your climbing, that this won't define you, and it certainly isn't going to stop you.
Yeah, so I think that I came to the realization that there's nothing I can do personally about whether or not my eyes are fixed. It's a bigger than me picture. But I was quite determined that my eyesight, or lack thereof, was not going to stop me from climbing when I lost it all. And it did take a good couple of years. When I went from having terrible sight to basically no sight, I stopped leading for a while. And anyone who knows anything about climbing will say that's probably quite understandable. Leading is the yardstick to be measured by, and I didn't want to accept a different set of rules because of my disability, basically.
The climbing that you do is world class, and it's not for the faint-hearted. Explain to us how you manage such daunting and dramatic climbs, and perhaps reveal who your secret weapon is in this.
So my secret weapon that you're referring to is my main climbing partner and wife, Molly. It's not that I climb with her exclusively, but obviously we're married, we climb a lot together, and she is kind enough to act as my sight guide. So she lends me her eyes when we're climbing. So as we're climbing together, generally she'll be belaying, which means controlling the rope stood at the bottom, and at the same time she'll be looking up and she'll be trying to spot holds for me. It's quite easy to do that when you're in an indoor climbing centre and all the holds are kind of orange and brightly coloured and obvious. When you're climbing outside, obviously it gets more challenging because Molly looks up and she can't tell from underneath which is the good bit from 25 metres away on this rock that looks like, Swiss cheese. She can't tell which of those little holes is good and which ones aren't. So a lot of it is down to me.
And also a lot of it is down to touch, isn't it? And sometimes she can't even see you.
Yeah. So there are certain routes where the shape of the rock means that there's no direct line of sight between Molly and I. A good example is on the Old Man Ahoy. So the Old Man Ahoy is this big rock tower. And on one of the pictures, one of the sections, I kind of climb around onto the other side of the tower. So the tower is in between Molly and I. She can't see through rock, so she can't help me.
And so how do you actually do it? You've got a lot of attachments. You can tell I'm not a climber because I don't know what they're called. But you have a lot of things hanging from your belt. I know that you know where each of them are. Obviously, a lot of preparation goes in. But on those bits where she can't see you and you're out there and you're on your own and you're leading, how do you do it, Jesse? And by all means, use the Old Man of Hoy as an example to try and build as a picture of what you're experiencing.
So I think the main thing is preparation. So for each section, climbers call each section a pitch. If we think that we might lose line of sight, then Molly will go through the description of the pitch with me. So the description might be traverse right for 5 meters, find a corner, climb the corner to a sloping ramp on the left, and then exit easily. That'll be the description of the pitch or something like that. And I'll have that set of way markers in my mind, and I'll be looking to follow those. In terms of finding the holds, then that is just down to feel. And obviously, sometimes I miss some of the holds, and that can make it loads harder. If you wind up missing one of the critical hand or foot holds, then there might be an alternate sequence, but it's probably not the easiest sequence. And in terms of the gear, you're right. So you have a whole selection of different gear attached to your harness. And I should be really clear that the gear is not there to pull on to aid your ascent. It's only there to catch you if you fall off. It's like a safety thing. It's not, you don't pull on it to go up. It just stops you from dying if you fall off. So when I'm climbing, I'll be looking, in air quotes, for opportunities to place the gear. And when you find a crack, you'll run your hand up the length of it and you'll kind of build a 3D model of it in your mind. And you can work out how big is it, what shape is it, and is it suitable for any of the bits of gear that you got on your harness. Yeah, and I've got them kind of arranged in a very specific way so that once I know what piece I need, I know where it is on my harness.
Are there any moments of sheer frustration, Jesse, when perhaps you've missed a natural handhold and you're up there thinking, actually, I'm not quite sure where I'm going next?
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Does it?
So one of the most frustrating things actually is when you are using a hold for, let's say, your right hand, and you take your hand off the hold and you go to investigate to see if there's a better one. And then you can't find the hold you had again.
And you know it's there.
You know it's there because I was holding it like 5 seconds ago, but you're like, where has it gone? I'm sure it hasn't moved.
It was interesting because on the documentary Climbing Blind, which was featuring your ascent of the Old Man of Hoy, a couple of the team were actually blindfolded. Climbers were blindfolded. And these also are fellow world-class climbers, but to see them struggle when you put that blindfold on, just I presume, so that they could get a feel of how you experience things. It was quite extraordinary, really. They sort of almost went to jelly in a way.
I'm sure they'll be happy to hear you describe them as that.
But what was the idea behind that? Was it to give them a sense to understand what goes through your mind and what you're going through out there?
Yeah, and to put it into context as well, to show that it's not easy, basically. Yeah.
I hope they'll forgive me for saying they went to jelly, but I suppose as a viewer of the documentary, it really did just show, it gave you that feel that how hard it would be without your sight. And of course it was challenging, I'm guessing, for the cameraman as well, because you had a cameraman above you. So, yes. I mean, you're surrounded by some extraordinary people when you made the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Alastair, the cameraman, had a real dilemma in that normally he wants to be just a fly on the wall. He's not there. And there were certain times when I was out of sight of Molly and he could see that I was finding it hard because I'd missed a critical hold. And he's like, I can't say anything. I can't tell him. You just got to stay here. Yeah, he didn't want to ruin the authenticity of it by telling me where the hold was, because in a normal scenario, he wouldn't be there and he wouldn't be able to do that.
Exactly. And then in a way, that spoils the achievement for you, because the whole point was that you were leading that climb. The Old Man of Hoy is familiar to me a little bit because we interviewed in the very early stages of the Convex Conversation Sir Chris Bonington, and I think he climbed it. I think he was the first to climb it in 1966. And then he climbed it again to mark his 80th birthday, which he told me he wished he hadn't done, but it was for the one show and he'd committed to it. Tell us a bit about the sea stack. To me, it looks like it's made out of Jenga bricks. It's quite a magnificent sight, and that feels weird saying that to you because I know you can't see it, but you felt it and you get a sense of what it's like, I think. It's quite daunting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an incredibly cool route. One of the most distinctive routes in the UK, I think. So, as you said in the introduction, it's 450 foot tall. It's 137 meters. It's this big tower of sandstone that comes straight up out of the sea, just off Hoy, which is in the Orkney archipelago, just off the northeast coast of Scotland. It overhangs on every side, and it's not easy for a couple of reasons. The overhangingness and the difficulty of the climbing is one, but on the lower sections of the tower, the rock quality isn't brilliant. It's quite crumbly, which obviously adds to the difficulty, but also to the danger, because if the thing you're pulling on snaps off, that's not great. And then the last, we can't go without mentioning the fulmars. They're these massive seagulls that will basically vomit disgusting, partially digested fish goo all over you if you get too close.
Oh, nice.
I am a fulmar whisperer. They did not vomit on me.
And why did you choose the Old Man of Hoy for this particular documentary?
So the Old Man of Hoy was basically one of the routes that is on my radar. So any day where you go and climb a sea stack, it's going to be an adventure. And at the time, the Old Man of Hoy was kind of right at the limit of my climbing ability. So for me, the most rewarding climbs are the ones where you can do them, but you have to give everything. If it's too easy, you're not really fully engaged in the challenge. If it's too difficult for you to do, then obviously you can't do it. So at the time, it was right at the sweet spot of my ability.
Watching your journey down the cliff to the water's edge to actually start the climb felt in some ways to me almost as hairy as the actual climb itself. That was not an easy route down, was it?
I'm in more danger there than I am on the route. If I slip at that point, I die because I'm not roped into anything and the drop below. Whereas if I fall off on the Old Man of Hoy, the consequences aren't going to be great, but I'm probably not going to die.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. And Molly,
Sorry, a bit morbid there.
Molly guided you beautifully down. Tell me a bit about Molly. Obviously, you're man and wife, but there must be an extraordinary trust and a code between you to do what you do together. And Molly's an extraordinary climber too, isn't she?
Yeah, so she will not admit it, but she's a far better climber than I am. Obviously, she can see, but
That helps, eh?
it does help. So yeah, she is, as you say, incredibly trusting. But I think trust is something that climbing forces you to, because you are literally trusting your climbing partner with your life. You know, if you fall off and they don't stop the rope pulling through, yeah. So that trust is an integral part of climbing, but it goes a bit deeper when Molly's acting as my sight guide. I never impose this on her, but she feels the weight of responsibility of if she tells me to go the wrong way, then she worries about that. But I think there are a couple of things that make Molly an excellent sight guide. Calm under pressure, able to communicate in some pretty harrowing scenarios, and able to think on her feet. So sometimes she will look at a route and she'll plan the sequence that I'm going to use. And I get there and I go, no, that's not a handhold, that's a foothold. And she has to completely rejig the sequence that she's had planned out in her mind on the fly with time pressure. Molly's excellent at that.
She says that sometimes she lies to you. Is that true?
I will neither confirm nor deny. So she is not always able to see that much, obviously. When she's 25, 30, maybe even up to 50 meters below me, trying to look up and try and spot a 10 mil edge, it's just not going to happen. So sometimes she has to get a bit creative and basically give some educated guesses on where she thinks there might be holds for me to go and investigate.
And what have been perhaps the most harrowing situations? You mentioned that sometimes it's a bit harrowing. Where in the world have you been where it has been really tough and perhaps frightening?
We were in Greenland and we had an anchor failure and 3 of our friends fell 200 and something meters in the middle of nowhere when we were 200 miles from any form of civilization in minus 15 C. That was harrowing. There's a route in Pembroke called Kinvig, which in hindsight really is a bad choice for a blind person. It's not particularly well protected, which means that while there are some opportunities to place gear, dubious whether or not you're dead hold if you fell on them. And the climbing is all very difficult if you can't see. It's an intricate foot sequence. And I thought I was going to drop every move and the consequences wouldn't have been great. So those are the two that like kind of spring to mind, I think.
And I'm sure there've been some wonderful successes like the Old Man of Hoy. How did that climb go for you, Jesse?
Old Man of Hoy is an amazing route and one that sticks in my mind forever, I think. Yeah, everything kind of leading up to it. We had that one chance given our weather window and yeah, an amazing day.
What did it feel like when you reached the summit?
Satisfying, I think. I'm not one for big displays of emotion, as people know me well, but yeah, if you know me, you can tell that I'm very happy when I top out.
But I'm going to ask what you might think is a silly question now, but the documentary ends in the evening. You've made it to the summit. And as I was watching, I kept thinking, how did they get down? Do you abseil down because you've got some holds and some rope? Or did you have to climb down?
Personal helicopter? No. Yeah, you're right. Abseil. So yeah, there are points where you can kind of connect your rope, abseil down, and then pull your ropes to kind of retrieve them. And you have to do 3 abseils to get down to the ground. And because the tower is overhanging, for the 3rd abseil, you're just kind of dangling in free space out from the tower, kind of slowly kind of corkscrewing around. And I was just listening to the waves below, like crashing on the waves. And I'm like, I hope someone's going to tell me when I'm almost about to hit the ground so I don't just like lower myself onto my butt.
Because you were shattered when you got to the top, obviously, which is why I asked the question, because I thought, oh my God, he's got all the way there to the top and surely you don't have to climb it. The sequel has just come out. It features the Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Very different, I would imagine. Tell me a bit about the sequel and that particular challenge.
Yeah, so it follows me in my attempt to climb a route called El Matador, which is on the Devil's Tower in Wyoming. It's taller than Hoy, but that's not really the thing that makes it different. It's much harder in terms of the climbing than Hoy. Like, I had thought it was going to be 2 notches harder. I won't, go into grades, but I had thought it was going to be 2 notches harder. It is significantly harder than 2 notches harder. I am right at my limit, like properly redlining for what felt like an eternity. So Alistair says it was compelling watching.
Well, I've literally just received the link to it, so I'm looking forward to some compelling watching. But without giving everything away, how would you tease it? What were the highs and lows that I can look forward to there?
I have never had such pain in my calves, I think is the thing. It is super, super sustained. So the crux, the most difficult bit, is this feature that's this kind of square cut, like almost like an open elevator shaft. And you have to climb up this elevator shaft by pressing on the walls with your feet. So 1 foot on one wall and 1 foot on the other. And you kind of press outwards with both hands and feet to kind of climb up it. And this goes on for 38 meters, which doesn't sound like that much, but when you're in it, it feels like it's 300 meters long and there's nowhere to rest, really. So by the time you're getting to the top of this elevator pitch, everything is screaming at you. It's like I've just been trying to sprint for the last 2 hours. I am utterly exhausted. And all the time you're having to stay calm and get the gear in.
How did Molly find it? Did she enjoy the challenge of it?
Yeah, she did. One of the things is that because Molly and I are quite kind of different styles of climbers, the routes that suit me don't necessarily suit her. So she found it really hard. She's quite a lot shorter than me, so she wasn't able to bridge between the two walls of the elevator shaft for as long because they were too far apart for her for large sections of it.
And did Alastair enjoy it too?
I'll have to ask him. He said it was one of the most, intense experiences. I think that might be code.
You sent me an amazing film of you ascending Norway's frozen iconic Gausta Falls. Tell me about the falls. They look to me like a beautiful frozen ice palace.
Yeah, so ice climbing is very cool, both metaphorically and literally. So, yeah, Gausta is in a place called Rjukan in Norway. It's like the European ice climbing mecca. So rather than in summer where you'd climb with little kind of rubber-soled shoes and just your hands on the rock, in winter you have ice axes and crampons that you can kind of slam into sections in the ice. But it's quite tricky because when you're placing your ice axes, you have to aim for little concave sections in the ice to hit with the tip of your tool. Because if you hit a bulge, the ice will just shatter. And when you can't see the concave section to aim for, that makes it really quite hard. So basically I have to pull up, put my top tool on the ice, search around with my top tool to find a concave section to aim for, then remember where that is, pull back, swing, and hope that I can hit the target. And it's incredibly what we call pumpy, like your forearms just holding on for that length of time.
It looked really difficult. There was sheer ice walls and it looked so beautiful, but totally unforgiving. Why did you want to do it?
The trite answer is because it's fun. I think that part of it is being in these really cool environments and giving yourself a challenge as well. There are some elements about ice climbing that make it really suitable when you can't see, because if the ice is fat, so long as you can hold on, you can always make yourself another hold. Whereas on rock, that's not necessarily true. If you can't find the hold, you can't just make another one. Whereas on ice, you can.
How do you cope with the temperatures?
Yeah, you just have to get used to them, I think. The hardest thing is when your hands go numb, because obviously you're trying to hold your ice axes, but also place the ice screws. So for safety, you have to screw these metal screws into the ice and clip the rope to those. And it's really hard to get those started. And when you can't feel your hands as well. Yeah.
You did it with Tamara Lunga, also an incredible extreme climber, but someone who's also overcome adversity and personal tragedy on K2.
Yeah, so Tamara was one of the top high altitude mountaineers. She was attempting to become the first lady to claim a winter first ascent, and suffered a big tragedy, and quite a few members of her team died on that ascent.
And what was she like to climb with? She seemed to have a wonderful sense of humour and optimism and looked a great climbing partner actually for you on that project.
Yeah, and I think the thing that impressed me most is that we'd never met before and she took on the responsibility for being a site guide. And that scares a lot of people. There is a lot of responsibility. A blind climber going and climbing something sounds improbable. When you say that they're leading as well, that's even more improbable. When you say it's on ice, you get the picture. There's a lot of things that make it seem out of this world. And she was brave enough to kind of take on that challenge and did incredibly well.
She asked you on that film about whether sometimes people think you're crazy about doing these kind of climbs. So I'll ask you the same thing. Do some people say, Jessie, this is bonkers, you shouldn't be doing this, it's too dangerous?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not for me to judge. I don't think I'm crazy. I think that while there is risk in what I do, there is risk in everything. And it is not possible to eliminate all risk. Even if you could, you wouldn't want to, because if you did, you'd condemn yourself to the certainty. And I think you'd be missing out on a hell of a lot.
I think you said to her as part of your answer that sometimes crossing the road in normal life can be more dangerous for you than some of the extraordinary challenges that you take on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that's really important is that when I'm climbing, there is a whole load of mitigations to control the risks. The most obvious being experience. I've been at this for over 20 years now. There's a whole load of pre-planning and thought that goes into identifying what the risks are and solving them ahead of time. So it's not like I have no control over the risks there. Whereas there are some things, as you say, crossing the road. Well, if there's no crossing and I'm on my own, I can't see the cars. I have no control over them. I'm listening for them, but what if they're electric? What if I haven't seen them? If I mess this up, then it could be over in a matter of seconds.
I think you said it would be easy to interpret your blindness as an insurmountable barrier, but that isn't how you see it, is it, Jessie?
No, I don't think it's insurmountable. Obviously, it requires a full lot of commitment, problem solving, determination. But yeah, I don't think it's insurmountable.
No, I think you said you were giving fate the middle finger, which I like that quote.
So that comes from when I was younger. I read a lot of the Terry Pratchett books, and then anyone who's read them, the gods basically sit up and it's like they're playing a dice game with the humans living on the disc being their pieces, and there's two gods, fate and the lady. It's almost as if in my genetic condition, I'd been dealt this hand of cards that meant that climbing was going to be almost blocked off for me, like something that wasn't going to be possible. And every time I go climbing, it's like giving that personification of fate the finger.
How much does your climbing mean to you, Jessie? I know you say you're not very an emotional person, but I'm guessing it's a very important part of your world and your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I've been doing for a very long time and hope to do so for a long time more. I think the thing about it is the places you go, the bonds you make, and the experiences you have. It's something that is out of most people's experience, and I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Does it give you a real sense of freedom as well? That's why climbing appeals to me, and I haven't quite got round to it yet. But our mutual friend, Gilly MacArthur, who will get a little name check at the end because she introduced us, has threatened to take me climbing.
Well, we'll have to make it a date, won't we then, Helen? We'll have to, all have to go.
Oh, crumbs, you're all far too good for me. But maybe that's a good thing that you're all so good. But does it make you feel free and you're out there in nature and breathing fresh air, apart from the kind of seagulls throwing stuff at you, which they didn't?
You can go somewhere without full Mars, don't worry. Yeah, absolutely. I think that you really have to concentrate. So you have to soak in that moment. You are not thinking about anything else apart from where's my next hand? What's my body doing? Where's my gear going? You're not thinking about, what was I doing last week? What deadlines have I got coming up? Those thoughts not in your head. It's quite meditative almost.
Yeah, it's funny because when I met Gilly, it was for the podcast, and she took me cold water swimming in Windermere. It was 11 degrees, which to her I would imagine is like a bathtub. But believe me, 11 degrees in Windermere was not like a bathtub for me. And that was meditative as well. I just felt there was nothing else I could think about. And I felt my mind was completely on the task in hand. And it's a great privilege, I think, isn't it, to be able to go and do things and experience things like that. I think it's important for our mental health and well-being too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it certainly puts out everything else into perspective, I think.
No, it does. When you were doing the ice route in Norway, the project was sponsored by Gore-Tex, who donated to a charity of your choice. Who did you pick, Jessie?
I picked a charity called Mendar Mountains. So they help to kind of conserve some of the mountain environments in the UK. Restoring footpaths, a thing close to my heart, because when you can't see, often getting to the crag is almost more difficult than the climbing.
That's definitely how it felt with the Old Man of Hoy, that it was more difficult actually getting to it. And are our mountains in a decent state, or is there a lot of work that needs to be done?
There's always work that needs to be done, whether it be that, like educating people in how to look after their mountains, take any photos, leave any footprints. There's the effects of climate change, which is obviously manifesting itself in some of the really fragile mountain environments. If you go to the French Alps, for example, there isn't a starker place where you can see the effects of climate change than there. So yeah, they definitely need our love, care and attention.
What are your favourite places, do you think, in the world to climb?
Oh, that is hard. I think one of them is Morocco, actually. So we're going out to Morocco in a couple of months again for the third time. Climbers Playground. Where else would I pick? Red Rock in the States, very cool. Joshua Tree, also in the States. Fontainebleau. The list could go on. And I think that it kind of depends on what favourite you wanted. Did you want the best route, or did you want the most peaceful atmosphere, or were you talking winter routes? The question you ask depends on the answer you get.
And can you do something fun as a beginner if you're out climbing with people like you and Gilly?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think it's always good to go climbing with people who are better than you, because they push you and they kind of get you to try stuff that you didn't think was possible. But actually, if you give yourself to it, it definitely is. And depending on the place where you go, then obviously it's totally possible to have, mixed ability climbing partnerships.
And what are the challenges out there left for you? I mean, we've talked about 2 major challenges there, but have you got anything in mind for further on in 2025 in terms of perhaps documentaries or films?
So I think the main thing for me at the moment is kind of injury rehab and training. So apart from the skipping away out of the country to go to Kalymnos, usually in the UK, winter is kind of training time, because, you don't go rock climbing when it's pouring down with rain, and then get yourself into a good physical state to go climbing when the spring and summer come around. So yeah, there's lots of things in the UK that are on my radar, in Pembroke, the Lake District, and then further afield as well.
And then does that training also involve climbing walls and the gym and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a multi-year process, the muscles you need for climbing are very specific. So working on them is a process of years, not weeks.
Oh, I was just thinking also of the first ascents, because we talked in the introduction about first ascents in places like Morocco and Greenland. Does that mean you're the first person to go and do that particular route?
Yes, absolutely. And in Greenland, they were on 2 previously unclimbed mountains.
So there must be a massive excitement doing something like that, and adrenaline, I would have thought.
It's often what we call type 2 fun. There's a lot of apprehension because you don't know what you're going to get. One point that is interesting, though, is that when I did my first descent on rock, it wasn't that different to my normal climbing experience. Whereas when I talk to sighted climbers, they say that experiencing a first ascent and repeating an established route are 2 very different things, because when you're climbing an established route, you have a description in the guidebook, you have an idea of how hard it's going to be, you can stand at the base of the route and look at it and kind of get a feel. But when you're on a first ascent, you don't have any of that information. It's all appearing in front of your face and you've got no idea what's coming up. Well, that's climbing for me every time I go climbing. So in some ways, almost every route I do is a first ascent.
Gosh, it is really, in a way. Although I suppose the one difference perhaps is that then Molly doesn't have stuff to read and research, because it sounds like she's very well prepped when you're climbing. But yeah, I'm guessing every ascent for you is a bit like a first ascent. And it clearly brings you a lot of joy, Jesse.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you for coming back from your trip and talking to me, because it's a sport that really interests me and fascinates me and inspires me to hear and to watch on the documentaries how you do it. It's just extraordinary, Jesse, and keep on doing it, and keep on getting those firsts.
I'll try.
You've been listening to Jesse Dufton. God, I do hope we go climbing together at some point, talking about his life and achievements as a blind climber. And a massive thank you to cold water swim coach Gilly MacArthur, who we featured just a few weeks ago, for introducing us and telling me about Jesse in the first place. Don't forget to download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com, and I'm sure you'll find other episodes you like with other adventurers, as well as scientists, academics, celebrities, sports heroes, and ordinary people with extraordinary lives. I'll be back next week in the company of music legend Malcolm Geary, hearing stories from his life in music, producing The Tube, working with stars like Madonna, and being involved with the original lineup of Band Aid. See you then.